They expected Grandma to pack her bags for the holiday, and the calls began to come in the same way they always had: warm, familiar, full of family talk, but threaded with an unspoken assumption that her calendar was theirs to fill. Thanksgiving plans were mentioned as if they were already decided, and the pressure arrived wrapped in love and practicality. Eleanor, who had spent her life arranging schedules for others, found herself holding her own silence like a small, steady object. She didn't rush to say yes or no. She simply began to take time to think. She had learned, somewhere between 70 and 82, that silence could say more than any explanation ever would. Eleanor Whitmore sat in the same kitchen chair she'd occupied for 43 years, in the same house on Birch Lane in suburban Connecticut, with the same view of the neighbor's oak tree that had been a sapling when she'd first moved in. The tree was massive now, its branches reaching toward her window like old friends offering shade. Her teacup sat cooling between her palms, Earl Grey, always Earl Grey, steeped for exactly 4 minutes. The ritual hadn't changed in decades, but something else had shifted recently, something small enough that most people wouldn't notice, but significant enough that Eleanor felt it in her bones the way she felt approaching rain. Her children had started calling more often. Not dramatically more, not every day or even every other day, but the calls had taken on a pattern: predictable times, predictable tones, predictable lengths. Tuesday evenings around 7, Thursday mornings around 10, Sunday afternoons almost always around 3. The calls themselves were warm, that was the thing. There was nothing harsh or demanding in her daughter Sarah's voice when she called from Denver, asking how Eleanor was feeling, whether she'd been to the market that week, whether the gutters had been cleaned before the autumn rains. There was genuine affection in her son Michael's check-ins from Boston, his questions about her doctor appointments, and whether she needed anything from the pharmacy. But underneath the warmth, Eleanor detected something else, an assumption, a quiet expectation that her time was available, her schedule flexible, her days a blank space waiting to be filled with their needs. "Mom, I was thinking," Sarah had said last Tuesday, her voice bright with the kind of energy that came from solving problems. "Thanksgiving is coming up. Michael and I were talking, and we thought maybe this year you could come to Denver. The kids would love to see you, and it would give Michael's family a break from hosting. What do you think?" Eleanor had noticed the phrasing, not "would you like to come," but "you could come," as if the decision was already half made, just waiting for Eleanor's rubber stamp. "Let me think about it," Eleanor had said. "Of course, no pressure, but maybe let me know by next week. I'll need to book your ticket and prices go up closer to the holiday." Eleanor had agreed to think about it. She'd been thinking about it ever since. Now, Thursday morning, her teacup cooling and the oak tree losing its last leaves outside her window, she waited for the 10 o'clock call. Her phone sat on the table beside her, silent for now, but inevitable in its ringing. She traced the rim of her teacup with one finger, a gesture so automatic she barely noticed doing it. The porcelain was smooth, familiar, the pattern of tiny blue flowers worn slightly from decades of washing. She'd received this tea set as a wedding gift. Most of the pieces had broken or chipped over the years, but this cup remained. She'd buried her husband with one of the matching saucers, tucked into his casket, because it seemed important that he take something of their daily life with him. That was 6 years ago. The grief had softened but never disappeared. She learned to live with it the way you learn to live with any permanent alteration, by adjusting your expectations, by finding new routines, by accepting that some absences never filled. The phone rang. 10 o'clock, precisely. Eleanor let it ring twice before answering, not to be difficult, but because she'd been reaching for it too quickly lately, as if she'd been waiting. She didn't want to wait. She wanted to be present in her own life, her own kitchen, her own morning ritual of tea and silence. "Hello?" "Hi, Mom. It's Michael." "I know, sweetheart. How are you?" "Good, good. Busy with work. You know how it is. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about Christmas." Eleanor sat a little straighter in her chair. She didn't consciously decide to do this. Her body made the adjustment on its own, some ancient instinct recognizing the beginning of something that required attention. "Christmas is 2 months away," she said mildly. "I know, but planning for the holidays always takes longer than you think. Sarah and I were talking. Have you two discussed Thanksgiving yet?" She mentioned Denver. "Right, so I was thinking if you go to Denver for Thanksgiving, maybe you could come here for Christmas. The kids are at that age where they really remember their grandparents now, and Jenny's parents will be traveling, so it would just be us. What do you think?" Eleanor's finger traced the teacup's rim again. Outside, a bird landed on the oak tree's lowest branch, a blue jay, noisy and bright against the gray November morning. "That's kind of you to offer." "It's not an offer, Mom. You're family. We want you there." "Let me think about it." There was a pause, brief, but Eleanor heard it clearly. The small silence where Michael processed her non-answer, found it slightly unusual, but decided not to press. "Sure, of course, but maybe let me know soon. Jenny likes to plan the menu early, figure out sleeping arrangements, all that stuff." "I understand." They talked for a few more minutes. His work, his children, the weather in Boston versus Connecticut, normal conversation, comfortable and familiar. But when Eleanor hung up, she noticed her teacup had gone completely cold. She poured it out, rinsed the cup, and set it in the dish drainer. Then she walked to the calendar hanging on her kitchen wall. It was a simple calendar, the kind you got free from the insurance company, with photographs of New England landscapes. November showed a covered bridge in Vermont, leaves brilliant against white railings. The calendar pages were mostly blank, a doctor's appointment on the 16th, book club on the 23rd, otherwise open white squares marching forward through the month. Eleanor stood looking at those empty squares for a long time. She had been a teacher for 37 years, 4th grade mostly, though she taught 5th for a while and 3rd during a staffing shortage. She retired at 65, not because she had to, but because her husband's health had started declining and she'd wanted time with him while time still mattered. Teaching had taught her many things, but perhaps the most important was this. People revealed themselves not in what they said, but in what they assumed. The students who assumed they'd fail usually did. The students who assumed the world owed them special treatment became perpetually disappointed. The assumes who assumed nothing and approached each day with curiosity, those were the ones who grew. Her children, she had noticed, had started assuming her time was theirs to arrange. This hadn't always been true. When they were younger adults, establishing their careers and relationships, they'd been more tentative. "Would you be able to come for Christmas? Is that too much travel? We understand if it's hard." But somewhere along the way, as Eleanor had remained healthy and active into her late 70s and early 80s, their questions had shifted. Now they didn't ask if she could come. They asked when she could come, where she'd prefer to stay, what her flight times might be. The flexibility was assumed, the availability was expected. And Eleanor, wanting to be helpful, wanting to be the kind of mother and grandmother who showed up and participated and maintained connection across distances, had gone along with it. Until recently, when she'd started noticing something. She was tired. Not physically tired, though her body certainly had its aches and limitations, but tired in a deeper way, tired of being arranged, tired of her days being treated as blank space waiting to be filled with other people's plans. She'd started waking earlier than usual, not from insomnia or anxiety, but from a quiet awareness that something needed to shift. She'd lie in bed in the dark pre-dawn hours, listening to her house settle around her, and feel that awareness growing stronger without yet understanding what it meant. Now, standing in front of her blank calendar, she began to understand. The next few days passed in their familiar rhythm. Eleanor walked every morning, the same route she'd walked for years, down Birch Lane to the corner, left on Maple, around the park, back home, 40 minutes total. The exercise kept her joints moving and her mind clear. She noticed things on these walks, the way the Hendersons had finally replaced their front door, the gradual accumulation of holiday decorations appearing in windows and on porches, the changing angle of morning light as November progressed toward winter. She also noticed her own thoughts, which had started circling around Thanksgiving and Christmas with increasing frequency. Her children meant well, she knew that. They wanted her involved in their lives, wanted their children to know their grandmother, wanted to maintain family connections despite geography. These were good impulses, loving impulses. But she also knew something they perhaps didn't. Wanting someone's presence and respecting their autonomy weren't always the same thing. Eleanor had been managing her own life now for 6 years, since her husband's death. Before that, they'd managed it together. But she'd never been someone whose days were arranged by others. She'd always been the arranger, organizing her classroom, coordinating family schedules, planning meals and holidays and vacations. She'd been good at it. She liked it. Being on the receiving end of other people's arrangements felt different. It felt diminishing in a way she hadn't expected. She completed her walk and returned home, made herself breakfast, oatmeal with blueberries, another ritual unchanged in years, sat at her kitchen table with a newspaper, though she'd increasingly been getting her news online. Some habits persisted simply because they marked time, gave shape to days that might otherwise feel formless. Her phone rang. Sunday afternoon, 3 o'clock. On schedule. This time it was Sarah. "Hi, Mom. How was your week?" "It was good, honey. How was yours?" "Crazy busy. The kids have so many activities now, I feel like I'm just driving them around constantly. But they're happy, so that's what matters. Did you think any more about Thanksgiving?" Eleanor set down her teacup. Her finger found the rim, traced it slowly. "I'm still thinking." "Okay, but Mom, I really do need to know soon. I have to book your flight, and I need to let the kids know you're coming so they can get excited. They're already asking about it." "What did you tell them?" "I said Grandma would probably come, but we were still working out the details." "Probably." Already assuming. "Sarah," Eleanor said carefully, "what if I said I wanted to stay home this year?" There was a pause, longer than Michael's had been. Eleanor could almost hear her daughter recalibrating, trying to understand a response she hadn't anticipated. "Stay home? For Thanksgiving? By yourself?" "Yes." "But why? That's so sad, Mom. You shouldn't be alone on Thanksgiving." "I wouldn't be sad. I'd be home." "I don't understand. Did we do something wrong? Are you upset with us?" "No, sweetheart, not at all." "Then why wouldn't you want to be with family?" Eleanor looked out her window. The street light was starting to flicker on, though it wasn't quite dark yet. That in-between time of November evenings, neither day nor night, everything soft and gray. "Let me think about it a little longer," she said. "Mom, you keep saying that, but Thanksgiving is 3 weeks away. I need an actual answer." Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest. Not anger, exactly, more like a door closing quietly. "I'll let you know," she said. Her voice was gentle but firm. "I need a bit more time." "How much more time?" "I'm not sure yet." Another pause. Eleanor could hear Sarah's children in the background, their voices high and enthusiastic, asking their mother something about dinner. "Okay," Sarah said finally, "but please don't wait too long. This is important." After they hung up, Eleanor sat in her kitchen as the light continued to fade, the street light outside fully illuminated now, casting pale yellow across her porch, across the empty chair that sat opposite her at the table. Her husband used to sit there. Every meal, every cup of tea, every morning newspaper. The chair had been empty for 6 years, but Eleanor still set the table for 2 sometimes, not out of denial or grief so much as habit, memory made physical. The kettle sat on the stove, cold now. She'd forgotten to reheat it after the call. She didn't get up to reheat it. She just sat in the gathering dark, thinking about Thanksgiving and Christmas and the blank calendar hanging on her wall. Eleanor had learned many things in her 82 years, but perhaps the most valuable was this. Sometimes the wisest response was no response at all. Sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply pause. She'd learned this as a teacher. When a student misbehaved, her instinct was to react immediately, to correct, to discipline. But she'd discovered that pausing, taking a breath, counting to 5, waiting, often changed everything. The student would self-correct, or the situation would reveal itself to be different than it first appeared, or the heat of the moment would pass, leaving space for actual communication. She'd learned it as a mother, too. When her children were teenagers, full of drama and certainty, she'd learned that responding to every emotional outburst only escalated things. Better to pause, to let them say what they needed to say, to wait for the storm to pass before offering perspective. And she'd learned it as a wife. 46 years of marriage had taught her that not every disagreement needed resolution. Some things just needed time, needed space, needed the grace of being left alone until they settled naturally. Now, as the days passed and her children's calls continued, predictable times, predictable tones, predictable questions about holidays, Eleanor applied the same principle. She didn't say yes, she didn't say no. She said she needed time. This frustrated them. She could hear it in their voices, feel it in the pauses that stretched longer than comfortable. They wanted answers, they wanted plans, they wanted the security of knowing where she'd be and when. But Eleanor was learning something new in her 80s. Her time was hers. Her calendar was hers. Her days were hers to shape or leave blank as she chose. And the more she sat with this understanding, the clearer it became that she didn't want to spend Thanksgiving in Denver or Christmas in Boston. She wanted to stay home. The decision formed gradually, like sediment settling to the bottom of a glass, not dramatic or sudden, but slow and inevitable. She woke one Tuesday morning, earlier than usual again, and lay in bed watching the ceiling lighten from black to gray to pale blue. Her room was quiet. The house was quiet. Outside, a few early birds were beginning their morning calls, but otherwise the world was still. Eleanor realized she loved this quiet. She'd loved it since her husband died, though she'd felt guilty admitting that even to herself. There was something peaceful about having her mornings to herself. No one to cook for, no one to coordinate with, no one to consider but herself. She wasn't lonely. People assumed widows her age must be lonely, especially during holidays, but Eleanor had discovered that solitude and loneliness were different things. She had friends. She had book club and her walking group and neighbors she chatted with regularly. She had her children and grandchildren, even if they lived far away. But she also had herself, and she'd grown to value her own company more than she had expected. She got up, made her tea, sat at her kitchen table as dawn broke fully over the neighborhood. The calendar hung on the wall, still mostly blank. Thanksgiving was 2 weeks away now. Christmas was 7 weeks away. Her phone would ring today, probably around 10, probably Michael, probably asking if she'd made a decision yet. Eleanor set her teacup down carefully. Her hands were steady. Her voice, when she spoke, was gentle but clear. "I need more time, sweetheart." "How much more time? Christmas is less than 2 months away." "I'm not sure yet. I'm still thinking." "About what? What's there to think about? Either you come here, or you go to Sarah's, or you stay home. It's not that complicated." "It is for me." There was a pause. Eleanor could hear Michael's frustration, though he was trying to hide it. "Mom, I don't understand what's going on. This isn't like you. You usually love holiday planning. Is something wrong? Are you feeling okay?" "I'm feeling fine." "Then what is it?" Eleanor looked out her window. The oak tree was almost bare now, just a few stubborn leaves clinging to the highest branches. "I just need time," she said again. "But I'll call you when I'm ready to talk about it, I promise." And then, gently but firmly, she ended the call. She sat in her kitchen for a long time afterward, her tea cooling once again, the morning light streaming through the window. Her phone sat face up on the table, silent now, but somehow feeling lighter, as if ending the call on her own terms had transferred some invisible weight. The calendar remained blank, but Eleanor no longer felt anxious about its emptiness. Instead, she felt something closer to relief. Days passed, then a week. Her children's calls didn't increase. Eleanor suspected they were conferring with each other, trying to figure out what was happening, why their usually accommodating mother had suddenly become uncooperative. She wasn't trying to be difficult. She wasn't punishing them or making a point. She was simply pausing, taking time, letting the question of holidays sit unanswered while she figured out what she actually wanted, not what everyone else expected her to want. She continued her morning walks, continued her routines. The world kept turning whether her calendar was full or empty. At book club, her friend Marion asked if she'd made holiday plans yet. "Still thinking about it," she said. "Well, if you end up staying local, you're welcome to join us. We're doing a small thing, just family and a couple of friends, very low-key." "That's kind of you. I'll let you know." But Eleanor suspected she wouldn't join Marion's gathering either. As kind as the invitation was, it still felt like filling her calendar with someone else's plans. She walked home from book club in the November cold, her coat pulled tight, her breath visible in small clouds. The sun was setting early now, that particular slant of late autumn light that always made her feel reflective. When she got home, there was a voicemail from Sarah. Eleanor listened to it while making dinner. Sarah's voice was careful, controlled, trying not to sound upset.
"Hi, Mom. I know you said you need time, and I'm trying to respect that, but I've been thinking, and I'm worried I did something to upset you. If I did, I'm sorry. I don't know what it was, but I'd really like to understand. Can you call me back when you get a chance? Love you." Eleanor set her phone down and stirred the soup she'd been heating. Sarah hadn't done anything wrong. Neither had Michael. They were doing what children did, trying to include their mother, trying to maintain connection, trying to plan holidays that brought everyone together. But they'd forgotten, or perhaps never learned, that inclusion should be offered, not assumed, that connection required consent from both sides, that plans needed to accommodate everyone involved, not just the organizers. Eleanor ate her soup slowly, cleaned her dishes, made herself a cup of tea. Then she sat at her kitchen table and looked at the calendar. Still blank. She realized she was okay with that. Thanksgiving came and went. Eleanor stayed home. She'd called both her children the week before, her voice calm and kind, and told her she'd decided not to travel this year. "But you'll be alone," Sarah had said, her voice tight with concern or maybe frustration. "Yes." "That's so sad, Mom." "It's not sad to me." "What will you do?" "Have a nice day, make myself a good meal, read, relax." "But it's Thanksgiving." "I know, sweetheart, and I'll give thanks, just here in my own home." Sarah had tried to argue, gently, suggesting Eleanor was isolating herself, suggesting this wasn't healthy, suggesting she didn't understand why her mother would choose to be alone when she had family who wanted her. Eleanor had listened patiently, then she'd said, "I love you very much, and I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving in Denver. Give the kids my love." Michael had been less argumentative, but more confused. "It doesn't make sense, Mom. Did we do something wrong?" "No, honey, you didn't." "Then why don't you want to be with us?" "It's not that I don't want to be with you. I just want to be home more." "But you're home all the time." "Exactly." He hadn't understood. She could hear it in his silence, but he'd accepted it eventually, because what else could he do? On Thanksgiving Day, Eleanor woke at her usual time, made her usual tea, sat at her usual place. The day stretched ahead empty of obligations. She could fill it however she wanted. She made herself a small turkey breast, no point cooking a whole bird for one person, made mashed potatoes, green beans, a simple salad, set the table properly with her good dishes and a cloth napkin, poured herself a glass of wine. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, the house quiet around her. No noise of grandchildren playing, no sound of multiple conversations happening at once, no negotiating about who would sit where or who needed what. Just Eleanor, her meal, and her peaceful home. After dinner, she called both her children, asked about their days, their meals, their children, listened to their stories with genuine interest. "Are you sure you're okay, Mom?" Sarah asked at one point. "I'm more than okay. I'm content." She could tell Sarah didn't believe her, but that was all right. Understanding would come or it wouldn't. Eleanor had learned she couldn't control that. That evening, she sat in her living room with a book and a cup of tea. The lamp beside her chair cast warm light across the pages. Outside, the street light flickered on right on schedule, illuminating the empty street, the bare trees, the quiet neighborhood settling into night. Eleanor felt no regret, no loneliness, no sense that she'd made the wrong choice. She felt instead a deep and surprising peace. The weeks between Thanksgiving and Christmas unfolded in their own rhythm. Eleanor's children called less frequently now, not out of anger, she didn't sense that, but out of uncertainty. They didn't know how to navigate this new version of their mother, the one who said no to family gatherings without explanation or apology. Michael tried once more to convince her about Christmas. "Mom, please reconsider. The kids really want to see you. And Jenny's already planning for you to be here. She's got the guest room all set up." "That's kind of her, but I'm staying home." "For Christmas, too? Mom, that's something. I just think you're going to regret this." "Maybe, but it's my choice to make." I heard him sigh. "I don't understand you lately." "I know, sweetheart. That's okay." After they hung up, Eleanor sat in her kitchen with her cooling tea. She wondered if she was being selfish, if her children were right to be confused or hurt, if a good mother, a good grandmother, would simply get on a plane and show up for holidays regardless of her own preferences. But she'd been getting on planes and showing up for years, decades. She'd arranged her life around other people's schedules for so long that she'd forgotten she had preferences at all. Now, in her 80s, she was remembering, and the preference was clear. She wanted to be home. Not forever, not exclusively, but this year, this season, she wanted her own space, her own rhythms, her own quiet. Was that selfish? Perhaps, but Eleanor had learned that sometimes self-preservation looked like selfishness to people who'd grown accustomed to your accommodation. She didn't call her children to explain any of this. She didn't send long emails justifying her choices or defending her decisions. She simply paused, let her silence speak for itself. And gradually, her children stopped asking. Sarah sent a text 2 weeks before Christmas. "Okay, Mom, you win. Stay home. We'll miss you, but I guess this is what you want." Eleanor read the message and felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief, yes, but also sadness that Sarah framed it as some kind of winning, as if this had been some kind of conflict, rather than simply Eleanor making a choice about her own life. She texted back, "I love you very much. Merry Christmas." Sarah didn't respond. Christmas morning arrived cold and clear. Eleanor woke to frost on her windows, the world outside white and still and beautiful. She made her tea, sat at her kitchen table, watched the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Her children would be waking in their own homes now, Michael in Boston, Sarah in Denver. They'd be starting their own holiday mornings, stockings and presents and breakfast chaos and all the noise and joy of family gatherings. Eleanor was here, alone but not lonely, quiet but not sad. She'd bought herself a small gift, a new book she'd been wanting. She opened it now, slowly, enjoying the anticipation, read the first chapter with her tea and toast. Around noon, both her children called. She could hear the noise of their households in the background, children's voices, music playing, the clatter of meal preparation. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said. He sounded tired but happy. "What are you doing?" "Having a lovely quiet day, reading, relaxing. How about you?" "Chaos as usual. The kids are already wound up from presents. Jenny's parents are here. It's a lot." "It sounds wonderful." Yeah, it is." He paused. "I wish you were here, though." "I know, sweetheart, but I'm exactly where I want to be." After the calls, Eleanor made herself a simple dinner: turkey sandwich, soup, a small salad, nothing elaborate. She wasn't trying to recreate a traditional Christmas meal. She was just feeding herself, nourishing herself, taking care of herself. That evening, as the light faded and the street light flickered on, Eleanor walked to her calendar hanging in the kitchen. December was mostly blank. January, which she'd just flipped to, was completely empty. She stood looking at those white squares for a long time. Then she picked up a pen and wrote in the first week of January, morning walk, tea, reading. Small things, her things, not obligations or arrangements or other people's plans, just her own gentle marking of time. She filled in a few more squares over the coming weeks: doctor's appointment, book club, coffee with Marian, but mostly the calendar remained empty. And Eleanor realized that was exactly what she wanted. The calendar had always been there, of course, hanging on her kitchen wall for years, but she never really looked at it the way she looked at it now. Before, it had been a practical tool, a place to track appointments and commitments and all the ways her time was spoken for. The emptier it felt,
the more concerned she'd been, as if blank days meant wasted days, as if unused time somehow diminished her value. Now she understood differently. The blank squares weren't emptiness. They were possibility. They were freedom. They were hers. Eleanor had spent most of her life filling calendars, organizing schedules for her classroom, coordinating family activities, managing her husband's medical appointments in his final years. She'd been good at it, efficient, reliable. But somewhere along the way, she'd confused being needed with being valued. She thought that the fuller her calendar, the more important she was. Her children's assumptions about her availability reminded her of something crucial. Just because you can accommodate someone doesn't mean you should. The phone still rang occasionally, her children checking in, less frequently now, but still present. They'd adjusted to her absence from their holidays without apparent damage. They'd found other arrangements, other solutions. They'd managed, the way people always managed. And Eleanor had managed too. She'd spent a quiet Thanksgiving and a peaceful Christmas in her own home, and the world hadn't ended. Her children still loved her. Her grandchildren would still know her. Nothing fundamental had changed, except her own sense of agency over her time. She resumed her morning walks. The winter was cold now, proper New England winter with snow and ice, but she bundled up and went out anyway, her breath forming clouds, her boots crunching through salt-treated sidewalks. She noticed that she walked a little differently lately. Not physically, her pace was the same, her route unchanged, but her awareness had shifted. She wasn't walking to fill time or check off exercise or maintain health, though those were benefits. She was walking because she chose to. Because these 40 minutes belonged to her, and she was spending them deliberately. At home, her kettle sat on the stove, always ready. Her teacup waited in its usual spot, and every morning she made her tea, sat at her kitchen table, and looked out at the world with gratitude for the simplicity of it all. The empty chair across from her remained empty. She'd stopped setting the table for two, not because she'd forgotten her husband or stopped missing him, but because she'd accepted that this was her life now, singular, hers alone to shape. Her calendar hung on the wall, mostly blank, deliberately so. And Eleanor understood finally what her 82 years had been teaching her all along. Time was the only resource you couldn't reclaim. Every hour given away was an hour lost. Every day arranged by someone else was a day not fully lived. She wasn't angry at her children for assuming her availability. They'd been raised in a culture that expected older people, especially mothers and grandmothers, to be endlessly flexible. That was bigger than them, older than them. But she was grateful she'd finally learned to pause, to sit with the question instead of rushing to answer it, to let her calendar remain blank, not because she had nothing to do, but because she'd chosen to keep it open. In the evenings now, she left the light on in the living room. Not the lamp by her reading chair, but the overhead light that illuminated the whole space. She didn't leave it on because she was expecting anyone. She left it on because she could, because it was her house, her electricity, her choice about how to fill the space. The phone rested face down during breakfast now, not because she was avoiding calls, but because she was present to her meal, her tea, her morning quiet. Calls could wait. Texts could wait. Everything could wait while she claimed this one small space of time as entirely her own. February arrived, then March. The calendar pages turned, mostly blank, occasionally marked with small chosen commitments. Her life continued in its quiet rhythm, and Eleanor discovered something unexpected. She didn't miss the chaos of family gatherings. She didn't regret her choices. She didn't feel she was missing out. She felt, instead, like she'd finally come home to herself. Her children adapted. They stopped assuming she'd travel for holidays. They stopped planning around her presence. They adjusted their expectations and gradually their understanding. Sarah called on Sunday in March, her voice different than before, less frustrated, more curious. "Mom, I've been thinking about Thanksgiving, about how insistent I was that you come to Denver. I'm sorry about that." "You don't need to apologize, sweetheart." "No, I do. I was treating your time like it was mine to arrange. That wasn't fair." Eleanor felt something warm bloom in her chest. "Thank you for saying that." "I still don't totally get it, why you wanted to stay home, I mean, but I'm trying to understand that it's not really about me understanding, it's about you getting to choose." "Yes, that's exactly it." They talked for a while longer about Sarah's kids, about the changing season, about small daily things that mattered more than grand plans. When they hung up, Eleanor felt lighter than she had in months. Michael called a week later with similar thoughts, though he expressed them differently. "I guess I always assumed you'd want to be with us. It never occurred to me you might prefer being alone." "I'm not alone, honey. I'm just by myself. There's a difference." "Yeah, I'm starting to see that." Eleanor didn't push for more understanding than her children could offer. She'd learned that wisdom often came slowly, in its own time. They would understand more as they aged, as they faced their own questions about autonomy and time and choice. For now, it was enough that they'd stopped assuming. Spring arrived gradually, as it always did in Connecticut. The snow melted. The oak tree outside Eleanor's window began to bud. The morning light changed angles again, reaching further into her kitchen, warming the table where she sat with her tea. Eleanor turned 83 in April. Her children called to wish her happy birthday. They didn't ask if they could visit. They asked if she'd like them to visit. A small change in language that meant everything. "Maybe in the summer," Eleanor said, "when the weather's nice and the garden's in bloom." "That sounds perfect, Mom." The calendar on her wall showed April now, then May. More blank squares than filled ones, more possibility than obligation. Eleanor stood looking at it one morning, her tea cooling beside her, and felt a deep sense of rightness. This was her life. Simple, quiet, chosen. She'd spent decades believing a full life meant a full calendar, that mattering meant being needed, that love required constant availability. Now she knew better. Love didn't require her to disappear into other people's schedules. It required her to show up as herself, which sometimes meant staying home, staying present, staying true to her own needs and rhythms. The calendar would remain mostly empty. That was her choice now, made not from loneliness or spite or confusion, but from clarity. She'd learned at 83 what she should have known at 30. You taught people how to treat you by how you treated yourself. And Eleanor was finally treating herself with the same care and attention she'd always given others. The phone rested face down during breakfast. The kettle sat ready on the stove. The calendar hung on the wall, its white squares open and waiting, not for other people's plans, but for her own gentle marking of days. In the evenings, the light stayed on in the empty living room, not because she was waiting for someone to arrive, not because she was lonely or lost, but because she was home, fully, completely, contentedly home. And that light, she discovered, was enough.